Right. So yesterday I have given you an agenda, right? What exactly are we going to cover in reference to API, microservices, all that. At the same time, I have shown you the difference on a high level note in reference to monolithic
Yes.
approach followed by the microservices, all that. Now, today I'm going to discuss about few basic points, like of course, as anyway you have known, right? So what microservices architecture is all about. Let me give you an official introduction part. So then I'll get into the difference between microservices, monolithic approach, as well as service-oriented architecture, all that. So
Sure.
as we see, microservices is an architectural style which majorly decomposes different big applications into smaller parts so that whatever the changes we want to make, so those changes can be made accordingly. This is where generally this microservices is all about. Now, when we are trying to understand about uh, the microservices in the real world, nowadays, if we see closely, microservices is being used extensively by different OTT platforms like Netflix, Amazon, at the same time, even e-commerce service providers like Amazon, eBay, right? So all these people are using microservices nowadays in their applications. As an example, if you see earlier, for example, let me give you an example uh, of what I can say. I'll give you an example, the difference between monolithic approach to the microservices. Let's say I'll give you an example. Uh, let's say, for example, apartment entrance. Let's say, for example, there is a gated community. Let me give you this way. So when there is a gated community, multiple studios and apartments will be there in that community, wherein there will be entrance, right? So because in and out of the people, whoever belongs to that particular community will be there. Now, whenever there are different services which are related to that, right? So services, it can be resident. In this resident, again, there are two classifications. Resident owner is different. Resident tenant resident will be as separate. At the same time, this resident may have different vehicles, right? So they may have two four-wheelers or a single two-wheeler or etc., right? So vehicle entrance must be there, right? So there are different apps nowadays we are using, like park and all that, right? So that we have to register, the car has to be registered in that app, so that automatically there will be a barcode scanner will be given automatically. Whenever car comes, automatically that will lift, right? So this boom barrier will lift. So this is the overall concept. So there are a lot of features which are involved in it. So whenever we normally used earlier in from the legacy systems point of view, wherein some monolithic approaches, all that, whatever the services are we required to maintain this community maintenance system, I can say in simple words. Normally for that, there is a common structure which normally we need to build. Means if you want to make any kind of changes into the existing application or existing architecture and all that, so it will be affected on the remaining areas also. So whatever the code are we going to change, whatever the testing we want to perform, whatever the designs we want to develop or edit, modify, right? So we have to do from the scratch. So the amount of time which you are spending on it, the amount of complexity in reference to the implementation will be doubled. That's how generally this monolithic approach is what usually used to perform in the beginning days. But nowadays in microservices, there is an advantage where we have a let's say, for example, a person wants to get messages, right? So messages to, let's say, for example, there is an app. Let's say, for example, gated community app was there. So we require a service where whatever the gated community service app receive messages has to receive by an owner or a resident as a WhatsApp message, right? So that was the service we required. Normally, what is that we have to do? If you have an app, so wherein we need to go to that app and whatever the messages we got, either it can be service or communication messages, we have to see there. But whereas when it comes to when we are implementing this microservices, especially in this sort of application, as an example I'm taking, there are possibilities where messages will be received, whatever the migrate messages we have received and all these messages, being an individual who is a resident over there, right? So they can receive a messages through a WhatsApp message also, right? So there is an additional service which you have to. So whatever the architecture we have prepared for a particular one or the design we have created, this is something only confined to that limited object, not to the full application. So of course, for that nowadays we are using cloud applications. For microservices has an advantage where we can use cloud services at the same time. We use like Kafka and all everything for a message services. Okay, that's a different thing altogether, right? So this is what generally the difference we need to see in reference to the microservices. If you see from the larger context. Now, whenever we talk about the principles of microservices, usually microservices principles are relied on two parts. Aishwarya, are you listening?
Yes, yes,
Yeah, right. So principles of microservices will be categorized into two different parts. Generally, the first one about single microservices per single business responsibility. There are different microservices we create for different business units or the functionalities whatever we are performing. So we prepare separate microservices for separate things. That's how generally the microservices will be of. At the same time, as whatever the microservice we have creating for single business units or the functionalities, we have a possibility where deployment can also happens independently. So there is no universal deployment we do. That's the reason why, if you remember, the best example in reality nowadays we see where in DevOps environment we are introducing, right? So in DevOps environment where we have to make if there is any possibility, if you want to make any kind of changes and all, regular changes can be done in the existing ones, right? So that is what and how generally we are doing nowadays. So there is a
yes,
possibility of independent responsibility because DevOps environment majorly enables this agile approach as well, because agile understanding over agile implementation wherein short-term deliveries can be done. At the same time, whatever the releases, high velocity release cycles and all, everything is possible in DevOps environment. At the same time, whatever the automation testing, right? So infrastructure provisionings, automated deployments, all these things can be done under the DevOps. So microservices is something possible, especially and useful nowadays, even for independent deployments. At the same time, the kind of dependencies like library dependencies, right? So execution environments, either it can be web servers, containers, right? So virtual machines and databases, all these things can be independently deployable. So these are the two major principles which normally we follow whenever we are trying to understand microservices and all. Now, when you see the difference between microservices to service-oriented architecture, right? So there are two things, because in the beginning yesterday we even discussed with, right? So differences of microservices, service-oriented architecture, at the same time monolithic approach. So monolithic approach, of course, we have discussed that part as well. Now, when we see the difference between microservices with service-oriented architecture, SOA implementations provide whatever the decomposition we do, everything from the service level point of view. But whereas
I have a doubt here. Sorry to interrupt you. I have a doubt here. The service-oriented architecture, like how it is different, like the one which we were doing in the web services, is that when we say SOA means that one, like web services?
yeah, whatever the web services implementation architectures we do, that's all comes under SOA, service oriented
Yes, SOA.
architectures.
Okay, okay. Got it.
Right. So
Thank you.
service level decompositions. So that is where it is involved. Right. So because we have different implementations, right? So web services can be used. Tomcat, at the same time, application services we can use like WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss, all that.
Yeah,
Timecode web
yeah, yeah.
services.
This term I was just knowing, so just wanted to understand that.
Yeah. So
Got
SOA
it.
implementations, a service level decomposition is what the major thing which we do, service oriented architecture. I'll give you an example. I'll give you a detailed explanation about SOAs also. Because do you have any idea about SOA earlier?
I have worked on web services. I
Hmm.
mean, I have worked on all the servers like JBoss and
Hmm.
I mean, how we used to deploy.
Hmm.
But we called it web services as a SOA. This part I was not sure earlier. But maybe few terminologies I am not aware of, but I have worked on that.
Okay. Anyway, I'll give you a different explanation about SOA later also. No problem. Okay. Because so that you get
Sure,
some
sure,
more idea. Because I'm
sure, sure.
pertaining now it's only with microservices with SOA. I'll give you a detailed explanation about SOA architecture and how it works. So that as you already worked on the application server, different application servers like WebLogic, WebSphere, JBoss, so that you could understand and you can relate yourself. Clear to you, Aishwarya?
Yes, yes.
Right. Right. So the major difference is coming back to the point. The major difference between microservices to service-oriented architecture is that SOA implementations majorly provide service level decomposition, as I told you. It's majorly focusing on the service level aspects. But whereas when it comes to the microservices, it's a micro level understanding over the implementation. Whatever the decomposition of the implementation as well as execution we are doing, everything will be continued till the execution of the particular application. That is not something pertaining or that is not something confined to the service level areas, whatever we initiates. But at the same time, microservices has a possibility to go further till the execution of the environment and all. So these are the two major differences. Of course, there are some couple of minor differences as well. But so whenever I'm discussing about those points, so you'll be understood well. So the major difference you see from a high level context, from SOA to microservices and all everything is these two, right? So this is what generally the principles of microservices are. Now, when it comes to the difference between monolithic and microservices, as I told you, right? So in the beginning, even I have told you, right? So because wherein this monolithic development means as a single tier application, wherein we are developing single level applications on a high level node, whatever the build of different var files or ER files and all will be there wherein in this monolithic deployment, whatever the deployment we do, everything will be on the uh, application servers, as I told you, right? So as you already, I think monolithic development in general we do, right? So uh, we are using different application servers and all everything monolithic development was. But when it comes to the microservices approach, whatever the microservice we are building, right? So either it can be fat jar files using boots and all everything. So this contains all the different dependencies which are relating to the web services. Either it can be of a standalone Java process or else because different platforms we use, either it can be single tier architecture. It can be two tier, right? It can be three tier, multi tier, entire architectures and all, right? So irrespective of the kind of architectures, whatever are we working on. So when we are implementing microservices here, whatever the building of an application, it's completely confined to a particular business unit, what we have taken. So that's how generally we That's how generally we relate when we are talking about this monolithic versus microservices, all that. Now, when we see the difference of monolithic, right? So this anyway, you know it. Now, when we, so when we have seen the characteristics of microservices, so these are the different characteristics we can see in microservice. The first one is about services are first-class citizens because we give highest importance for the services. What is that are we rendering for any end user? Right? So this is one characteristic we have. At the same time, microservices are lightweight, wherein this can be built and deployed when and wherever it is needed. So that is one more advantage we have. At the same time, microservices with polyglot architecture, where whatever the architects and as well as architecture implementations, either architects or developers can choose fit for the purpose of architectures and technologies for each and every microservices. Because whatever the microservices we are implementing, these microservices are individual on its nature, so that each services runs with its own architecture as separate or the technologies and all that. This is where generally this polyglot architecture consists of. Next, about automation in a microservices environment, because whatever the automation process we implement, especially in microservices environment, will be automated because as I mentioned in the beginning, right? So DevOps environment we are implementing now because two things. One is about agile is what we are using now. At the same time, we are implementing even DevOps environment also. These are the two things we are using nowadays. So one is about agile environment, agile approach, I can say, agile implementation approach. It is nothing to do with any technology, irrespective of the technology we are using or domain we are using. At the same time, majorly focused is on DevOps environment, right? So whenever we are working on the DevOps environment, whereas we develop an approach called CI and CD, right? So continuous integration and deployment delivery option where we can deploy whatever the changes we are required for us to make. So those changes will be done subsequently and we do the automation accordingly, right? So this is where generally this automation in microservices environment will be useful of. Next thing about microservices with supporting ecosystem, whatever the supporting ecosystem we are going to develop, especially on microservices, which will be used on that system. At the same time, whatever the microservices we are implementing, so these are distributed and dynamic because distributed as whatever the business functionalities as units we are using. So based on the business units and functionalities, implementation of microservices can be distributed as well as dynamic. So these are the different characteristics of microservices, which normally we follow whenever we are implementing the microservices, all that. Now, when it comes to the benefits of microservices, right? So what are the benefits of microservices? As I already mentioned you the benefit, the first one, which supports polyglot architecture, because the implementation of the services we are using, everything has its own architecture and the technology, so that whoever are working, either these architects or development team, whoever are working on the particular environment they are working on, so they can make as many changes as they want so that it won't get affected with the other components or the implementation what we have made, so that it is pertaining and it is confined only for a particular business functionality. Whatever the new implementation or the existing editings are we doing, everything is related towards supporting polyglot technology, everything is supporting, right? So this is one benefit when you talk about this benefit of microservices from the first part. The second thing about enable experimentation and innovation, because when we are working on the microservices, especially whenever we are working on the microservices, especially there is a possibility for us to write small microservices to achieve whatever the required targeted functionalities we want. But whereas when it comes to the monolithic, right? So when we want to see the difference from monolithic approach and all, whereas in monolithic approach, we don't have the facility, right? So because implementation of small microservices and whatever the targeted functionalities we want to achieve won't be possible in a micro level, especially on monolithic. So this is also another benefit. Now the third one about elastically and selective scalable, because scalability in terms of implementation as well as the cost of implementation will be will be, I don't say less, will be minimal, will be minimal, I can say, right? So will be minimal, because whatever is possible, whatever the selectively applied services and all everything, that is the only thing we are implementing. Okay, so we are not implementing anything else apart, right? So because whatever is required, whatever is really needed, scalable, it can be scalable, it can be used in any other environment, means make sure the configurations, etc. So and whatever the implementation we are working on using microservices is selectively contained only with with limited services what we are using as well as implementing. But whereas when it comes to monolithic approach and all, it was not the case. As far as the monolithic implementation itself is concerned, uh, there are possibilities where we whatever the RAR files or ER and all everything can be scaled, can be used and as well as scaled as a whole. The whole implementation has to be taken care of.
I have a question here. Like when we were using web services, so any normal web service we cannot, I mean, deploy on the cloud or we enable DevOps. Those things we can do on a normal web services or not?
Normal web service is not, whereas when we are using microservices, it supports cloud. Whereas in
Okay.
microservice level, it is possible.
Okay,
Whereas
okay,
in
not in a normal web service.
monolithic, it would be difficult for us to do it.
Okay.
Whereas when we are working on microservices, yes, it is the reason why, of course, the fifth point relating to that, right? So it supports the cloud environment, because when we are working on the cloud environment, that is really feasible for us to work on, because implementation, integrations of DevOps and all can also be done. But whereas in regular web services and all everything, it would be difficult. That is one more difference. Understood? Clear?
Yes, yes.
Understood, Aishwarya? Clear or not?
Yes, yes, it's clear.
Right, right. Next point about allowing substitutions. This is also one of the benefit under microservices, because normally microservices are self-contained ones, you know it, right? So these are all self-contained ones. At the same time, independently deployment modules. So major advantage here is to enable the substitutions in any of the microservices with another similar microservice is possible. So this is where generally substitutions we can do, especially from the context of microservices, if you understand. There is a feasibility, there is possibility where we can enable substitutions with other microservices, because implementation of the business functionality as well as the architecture microservices we are implementing is separate for one and another. So there is a possibility where we can allow substitutions and all everything can be done. So this is also one of the benefit we can see from microservice. The next thing is about supporting cloud, as you know, because cloud environment, cloud applications, incorporating cloud services is what we are doing nowadays, right? So because we are implementing cloud level implementation due to the infrastructural challenges as well as the cost, etc. So we are implementing infrastructure level services and all. So either it can be infrastructure or it can be a platform or a software as a services. So when it comes to the application development, especially it supports the cloud environment, because cloud level implementation, either we may go for AWS or Azure, right? At the same time, Google Cloud, IBM, all that, right? So it supports to the cloud environment as well. And last but not least, as I already mentioned few some time back, when it comes to the benefit of microservices, this can be enabled with DevOps environment. Because DevOps environment, as a nature, we can see DevOps by using agile development or agile implementation, agile approach, agile way of approach, wherein whatever the release cycles, right? So release, like even these high velocity release cycles, even though we have, depends on the need and as well as the importance of the customer, what they are expecting. So that is possible, especially in the DevOps environment, because even infrastructure provisions, right? So automatic deployments, all these things we do. So all these things are possible in DevOps environment. So majorly nowadays, especially when we are working on the applications, majorly to understand microservices, which is feasible for us to enable with DevOps environment. Because earlier, if you see the implementation and operations, we used to have two as separate. Due to the high velocity of the changes, if there is anything from the requirement level we want to make, that is really difficult for us to do. So the amount of time, implementation, complexity, everything usually increases. But nowadays we don't have the we don't have the difficulty, because we are enabling the DevOps environment nowadays and we are implementing those equally. So these are the major benefits we see from the context of the microservices is all about. Is it clear to you, Aishwarya?
Yeah, yeah. Yes.
Right. So